Hello, everybody. Welcome to Autism Awareness Australia's Ought to Know webinar series. It's the second in our series today. For those of you who are new to Ought to Know, it's a monthly webinar and it runs in 3 different streams. We're going to have 4 webinars about early intervention in very young children, another 4 about school age issues, and the other 4 are for people in my category with the adult children. So anyway, very happy to say the webinar today is made possible because it's proudly supported by Leap In. And Leap In are Australia's leading NDIS plan manager supporting thousands of Australians with disability across Australia. They are very much driven by the belief that it's people over profits, and they help people with disability by helping them get the most out of their NDIS plans. I think maybe it's time for me to call. Now I've read that, I feel like I should. Okay, I want to welcome our very, very special guest, Professor Andrew Whitehouse. Welcome, Andrew.
Yay.
All right, so Andrew is brace yourself. Apart from being on our board, so a fabulous contributor to us at Autism Australia, he is the Angela Wright Bennett Professor of Autism Research. He's the Director of CliniKids at the Kids Research Institute in Western Australia. He's a Professor of Autism Research at the University of Western Australia, the Autism CRC, past President of the Australasian Society of Autism Research. Basically, he's a chronic overachiever because
How
it's
boring.
too long a bio you're showing off. But I can hand on my heart say of all the years I've known Andrew Whitehouse, as very few researchers I've ever worked with who hand on their heart care as much about our families as Andrew does. So I'm pretty pleased to call him a board member, but actually a friend. So welcome, Andrew.
Nick, what an honor. I'm so pleased to be here. Let's get into it.
Well, we're talking about my favorite topic is early intervention for young children with autism, which is bizarre because I am like 2 weeks away from my child with autism turning 29. So I'm a long way away from the early intervention space, but I know how important it is and I know what great things it can do. And you are one of Australia's leading experts in it. So for those who are super new to this and who haven't been around for 20 something years, what is early intervention? How do you explain roughly what that means for young autistic children?
Really good question because we just say it as if it's a truism, but it's important to break it down as to why it's important. So, early intervention to me is about identifying that a child may have a certain need to support their development and then providing effective support for that child quite early in their life. And I mean, it's important for many reasons. I sort of localize it to 2 reasons that are super important. Number one is that early experiences shape our lives. You know, we talk a lot about brain plasticity. That's a really nerdy term for essentially the observation that you have when you see a child develop language. If you've ever seen a child develop language, what they can do with that brain is absolutely extraordinary. You know, there are points in development where kids are learning 20 new words a day and they're sticking. They're not falling out, they're sticking. That's brain plasticity. The earlier we can provide the support, the more we can take advantage of that. The second reason is because it provides a platform. It builds a platform on which skill development can then build. The way that our brain develops, the way that our skills are acquired, is it's layer upon layer upon layer. If we don't do the bottom layer, we're not going to develop the next layer, and so on and so on. Ultimately, though, early intervention is about changing the beginning because if we change the beginning, we change the whole story in how we can support kids. It's about helping kids grow up to be whoever they want to be, and that starts from that early point.
Yeah, it's funny. And thinking of an NDIS term there, I've always thought it's almost like it's building capacity in a child. We didn't used to call it building capacity, but that's kind of what it is, right? It's teaching the child things they don't know.
Yeah, it's exactly that. Look, I often see that our job as parents, our job as supporters of kids, is that our job is to open up as many opportunities for them as possible. So when they get into the champs, they can take whatever option is open to them, and that's their choice. But our job is to open those opportunities. That means supporting their communication, their skill development, their daily activities. If those kids can't do those things, they will not have those ability to choose whatever they want to do.
Okay, so we're talking about early. How early is too early, and is there too early? Is there a perfect age, or is it just start yesterday?
Oh, it's as soon as a need is identified. It's really interesting because, of course, when kids are babies, well, when we're all babies, it often seems like babies are not doing that much. Of course, I'm someone who sort of studies babies and looks at babies and has seen thousands and thousands of them, but I know babies are doing so much, and needs can even be identified as early as 4, 5, 6 months of age. But generally, because behaviour, the way that behaviour unfolds, we start to identify developmental need between 12 and 24 months. That's when sort of developmental needs tend to emerge. And the earlier we can provide support then, and it's really important not to wait for a diagnosis. You don't need a diagnosis to provide support because a diagnosis just helps us understand more about your child. But we already know your child at 12 months of age. If we can provide support as early as possible, that's the goal.
And has our understanding of early intervention, has it changed over the last 10 to 15 years?
Oh, completely. I mean, in one sense, it has sort of stayed the same. Scientific advances has just totally strengthened our understanding of the importance of early intervention. Just knowing more about the brain, knowing more about how children develop, the earlier we can support them, the better. But also, we've learned a lot more about how kids interact with the world. Early intervention used to be quite rigid and focused on compliance and really reducing what were so-called undesired behaviors. What we do know now is that actually kids learn so much better when things are individualized towards them, when it's play-based, when it's within their own sort of play activities, and within the child's natural environment. We also understand that kids are born with all sorts of different neurology, and that's not to be changed, that's to be supported and cherished. And then how can we work with different neurology to ensure that we get help kids acquire those platform behaviors that will help them choose what they want to do. Communication, help them learn to toilet themselves, help them to do all of those things that will get them into a point where they can leap into the world.
Yeah, beautiful. So herein lies the problem, I suspect, for parents, is there are so many choices of early intervention, and I'm sure it is quite overwhelming for newer families who might go online and Dr. Google is not particularly helpful and Dr. Facebook definitely is not helpful. And you get a lot of opinions about what is early intervention. I know we struggle with it here at Autism Australia, trying to figure out how do we best show families online and on our websites what their choices are without overwhelming them. How do you wrap it up in explaining what are the different approaches and what are the differences between them?
It is a really hard thing, and I think part of this is because we've never had the language to describe this. Autism intervention or support programs for kids on the spectrum really only emerged out of the last 10 or 20 years in terms, or sorry, that's not true, 20 to 30 years in terms of the volume of different types of supports. The way that they differ is in the way that they suppose that children learn. Now, children learn in all sorts of different ways, and in fact, children learn differently in between each other. And so there is no one right approach for a child. It's about finding the right approach for your child. So we're getting to some kind of categorization now. A general way to categorize is firstly developmental approaches. So it essentially developmental approaches has a view that children develop and learn in a way that follows a very clear developmental sequence. And so what developmental approaches, it's about following the child's lead and their natural interests and really trying to embed learning opportunities through relationships and through their natural play. Then we have behavioral approaches where there's really a more structured, an emphasis on more structured learning through reinforcement and consequence. Nowadays, behavioral approaches are much more play-based than they once were, but they really do work on the assumption and the science that children learn through reward and consequence. And then there's a combining of these two approaches. So you've got developmental approaches and behavioral approaches, and then you can combine them to form what's called naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions, NDBIs. And these are your things such as, you might have heard of programs such as Early Start Denver model or the Jasper model. These are approaches that have behavioral type learning embedded within developmental approaches. So they're the three sort of main categories of comprehensive approaches. But of course, we have more specific approaches. such as sensory approaches. There are lots of different types of supports out there that help children with their sensory needs, and to ensure that they're getting everything they need for their sensory needs, and in all sorts of different areas as well.
Yeah, and one of the queries I think parents might have is you just made a really good point, is that some of these things there's a lot of evidence and research to show their effectiveness. But I notice a lot, particularly when you're looking for the sort of more snake oil stuff, the use of the word evidence-based gets thrown around a lot. You know, it's cynically, oh, this is evidence-based. I mean, what can families do? What are some of the best resources to go to make sure actually there is some evidence behind this particular intervention that I'm looking at, so that the family doesn't waste any time and then the child doesn't lose any time?
Yeah, look, it is really, really challenging because historically the autism field has not held itself to the same standards of evidence that every other areas of health and disability have. And so the word evidence is used quite liberally. And of course, not all evidence is created equal. There is really strong, rigorous evidence towards, my auntie's cousin's nephew said, and everything in between. So there are a couple of things that families can do. Firstly, ask your practitioner, how do you know what is happening here is likely to help my child? And how do you keep up to date with the latest advances in the field? So that's number one. Firstly, ask your practitioner. Secondly, there are good resources now that are really clear cut that says this has a high quality evidence, this doesn't. I'll give a shout out to Autism Awareness Australia. The Autism What Next platform is an extraordinary platform. It's called Autism: What Next. It's a platform that really helps guide families through that pathway and can really help families understand what does and does not have evidence as we know what evidence is. But there are other platforms like the Raising Children's Network, which is a website by the Australian government, sorry, funded by the Australian government, but developed by private providers that has all sorts of reputable information. And then finally, the Autism Cooperative Research Centre, or the Autism CRC. Again, that website has all sorts of sheets, resources that helps guide parents as to what is evidence-based and what actually is not evidence-based, so families can help make their own decision what's best for their family.
Yeah, okay. And if parents are overwhelmed by the sheer amount of options and say they think, oh, I want to do all of them. Actually, we want to do a bit of speech, a bit of OT, we'll do some sensory, we want to do some behavioral things, and they kind of want to boil the ocean. How do parents prioritize what to do first? Or is the scattergun approach right? Or should you really start one before you start another?
It's a fantastic point because it's very, very challenging to understand what is the best way that you should start and where should you prioritize. Look, I always start in the area of helping children, number one, communicate their needs and keep them safe. That's your fundamental role as a parent. That's your baseline. If your children can't do that, that's where we need to start. Beyond that, it's another level of issues affecting their daily quality of life. And these might not necessarily be those core behaviours that we use to diagnose autism, but it might be things such as sleeping, it might be things such as eating, toileting. These are things that are so fundamental to their children's daily quality of life. These start to become a priority pretty quickly. And then beyond that, after communication and keeping kids safe, issues affecting daily quality of life, it's then skills and opportunities. What skills are kids going to need to acquire to open up their opportunities? Now, when they're really young, that might be those fundamentals of development. It might be motor development, so movement development, it might be cognitive development, thinking skills, it might be sensory development, emotional development. But as they get older, of course, kids might really identify as autistic, and that might mean identity development as well. And that really can't be underplayed. That's going to be a really important point as children develop as well.
I think that goes back to an earlier point you made, which is it's got to be individualized, right? You've got to look at the child in front of you. They all might share the word autism as a diagnosis, but that won't be how you describe the intervention.
100%. And this is one of the things that parents must really pay attention to is that there has been a tradition in the autism field to take a certain program and just layer it on a child and just say, this is the program that's in the book, I'm going to deliver it. Now, the disability sector is so much better at now at just saying that this program gives us the fundamentals and a syllabus that we can work through. But actually, the most important thing is not understanding what this child is, what diagnosis they have. It's understanding who they are. And that means, yes, identifying challenges, but also means identifying strengths. Who is this child? What makes them tick? And what really sets their buttons off. But the other thing is what world do they inhabit? And of course, when they're young kids, the world they inhabit is the household. What's in that household? What can families manage? What's on their plate? What aligns with their family philosophy? All of those things are just so critical to developing an individualized program that means that kids and families are met where they are rather than we as practitioners are.
Well, that's a good segue into my next question, which is about parental involvement.
Yeah.
Because I always think early intervention, it's absolutely nothing if the family aren't in on it. This is not something that can happen to the child. This has to be a world that is building around this child to open up all of these possibilities. How important is parental involvement? Does the research tell us something about that?
Everything. If I was to talk about one factor that determines outcomes, it's not necessarily whether the child has an IQ of X or Y. It's not necessarily whether the child is able to use verbal language or not. It's how involved the parents are in firstly understanding the neurodifference that their child has been born with, and then how much are they willing to be involved to support their child to be whoever they want to be. There was a time 30, 40 years ago where parents used to drive up to the therapy place, drop their child off, and away they go. And what we have learnt through research is that's actually not the way, in general, that we can best support kids and families. Kids do not exist without an adult. There is no such thing as a child, as the saying goes. There's only a child and a parent because children cannot exist by themselves. And it is through that dynamic that all learning, so much of the learning, happens. And so the more that families can be involved, and that means supporting that family as well to be involved. If you can't support yourself, it's going to be really tough to support the child. The more the family can be involved, and the more the family can be supported to be involved, the better.
So how do families break up that nexus, which is, I know my child needs early intervention because they're developmentally they're not doing certain things, and we're playing that game, but at the same time, I want my kid to be a kid. So how do parents sort of manage that, that feel like you're racing against time, but also the child needing to do what they love doing, being the goofball that they are, and having time off? How do parents deal with that sort of?
Well, it's so important, and parents need time away from doing that as well. Again, there used to be the sort of mantra of very high intensity hours is the best way to support kids. What we do know now is that yes, there is absolutely a threshold of therapy that children do need to support the development of those skills, but time away from the clinic room, time to be at home, to relax, to muck around with the family, to watch TV. All of that stuff is so critical to them, not just in terms of supporting their development, because so much learning happens there, but also to not waste their time of being a kid. They're allowed to be a kid, and it's important that they are a kid. So, how do you find that balance? I can't provide that. Only you can provide that. What I would say is one way that you can start to do this is by actually starting to embed therapy in inverted commas in your daily life. And so that might be time spent at the footy club, trying to get involved with footy, or time spent at a coding club or whatever it could be. And I'm not necessarily talking about you there and then doing a very therapeutic program while they're there. start seeing that as in and of itself a really critical part of their development. It's not time away from therapy. To an extent, it's far more valuable than therapy. So I'll go back to that first bit. What kids really need, first and foremost, is communication, the ability to communicate their needs, safety and security, but then that daily quality of life, and then that skill development. Above and beyond that, find ways to ensure that your child gets to be a kid and do those kid activities because it's so crucial. It is not time away from therapy, it is part of it.
But I guess that's the importance of parents knowing what's going on in therapy, because if your child's working on XYZ, the more opportunities you get to generalize XYZ by learning it in the real world with real people, it's going to help embed that learning even more. Yeah.
100%, 100%. And so the more that families can be involved and understand what's going on, the better. Now, that is not necessarily a requirement only of the parent. That's a requirement of the therapist as well. They should also, therapists should be demanding that, or not demanding, in providing all the information you require to do this. A few red flags I think families could look out for in terms of, is this early intervention sufficiently individualized? I think one of them, this is the sort of segue in my mind, is the first one is a reluctance to have parents observe. It's not a dance class. It is, it's really important that parents are involved because that is a critical ingredient.
It'd be a
Number
red
two,
flag for me. It'd be a total red flag for me. What are you
yeah.
doing in there? I need to be
Oh,
part of that to see it.
yeah, and it still happens, and it's your child, and this is the most precious being in your whole entire universe. You have a right to be there under good therapy practices. Second one, promises of curing autism. That's clearly a huge red flag. This is not something that we seek to do. And what we're seeking to do is to help children be whoever they want to be, and it's also not something that could or should be achieved. Inflexible approaches. The third one is inflexible approaches that don't adapt to the child's individual needs, that kind of off the shelf cookie cutter here. And you're like, well, why are we working towards this goal when we don't even, why are we working towards having my child learn to water ski when we don't have, we live in the middle of the desert, I mean, that's an exaggeration, but if you don't understand why that therapy goal is there, then it shouldn't be there. You need to understand why. Okay. The fourth one would be any dismissal of your concerns. You're a really important part, and I would say the most crucial part of your child's support network. You need to, your concerns should be met. And then finally, and this is a really important one, Nick, I know you're big on this one as well, progress monitoring. Don't get into this endless therapy cycle of therapy upon therapy upon therapy. You could and should demand to see improvement, supports. How are you tracking towards that goal? If you're not tracking towards that particular goal, why not? And what can we do to mix it up? Not every kind of therapy is going to be tracked towards success, towards a development, and but what we can do is pivot. And the only way that we understand when we can pivot is by actually tracking that progress. If you're not tracking progress, a big red flag.
Yeah, and I think it's even easier to do in this day and age with all the technology. I mean, it can be notes on your phone. It can just be understanding how many goals were we going for? How many did we reach? If we didn't reach them, that's cool, but did we pivot? Your point. Did we pivot? Did we find another goal? So I've got a couple of really good questions coming in from some families.
Right.
One of them is an anonymous person, so I don't know whether it's a mum or dad, but they're asking a really important question is, can a parent continue speaking their home language? And what if the child's doing English at school, is it okay for them to use their
Yeah.
native language at home? Is that going to confuse the child with autism?
Oh, what a great question. I love this question because I love it because I have an answer. Look, there's no effect. No effect. This has been studied in depth. And I remember very early in my clinical career, an Indonesian family came in and I learned Indonesian for a while to make sure that we could help the child learn at home because, of course, they were quite young and their whole learning was in Indonesian in the home environment. That was really important. But what we do know is that dual language learning does not seem to have an effect in hindering the development of the child in either language, which is really, really interesting. And again, if you've seen a child develop language, you're jealous of their brain. It's amazing.
Another question here is, how do you define functional communication? What does it specifically look like? And can you give an example of what is communication and what is not? I feel like that's a curveball question, but it's a good one.
It's a great question. It's definitely a curveball question, but I'm really happy to have a swing at it. Look, functional communication is the ability to communicate wants, needs, and desires, and that can be in many kids. Well, most kids, it's going to be through verbal means. For some kids, particularly kids on the autism spectrum, it may never be through verbal means. It could be, for example, through the use of devices. It could be through the use of signing. All sorts of different ways to communicate needs. The most important thing is that when they need, want, and desire something, like all humans, we want that purpose and belonging that comes through communication. They are able to do that, and so that's the purpose of therapy and support: is how can we do that in a way that's best for them.
Yeah, perfect. All right. So, look, we're coming towards the end, but one of the questions I think would be good to cover off is what are some of the biggest myths about early intervention that you'd like to debunk? Like, what are some of the
Ooh.
myths that get in the way when we're talking about early intervention?
Yeah, I think that some of the myths, it's interesting because this has evolved over the years. I think that there was a time when we were really communicating that too little therapy is going to be really harmful. I think then we went through too much therapy is going to be harmful. And with the changes in our disability sector, we need to really get to the understanding that actually different kids need different therapies. And for different amounts. There is no one size fits all. There is no 20 to 40 hours per week that every child needs. That's just simply a myth. What we do know, though, is that children do need and require a certain amount of support to develop those human rights that they have, communication skills, etc., etc. So I think the one size fits all, that is a myth. I think there's also a myth developing around early intervention being harmful. What we had many years ago is certainly in the 60s and 70s, there were approaches that we do know now through the wonderful advocacy of autistic people showing that actually certain compliance type behavior practices, holding therapy, for example, where you just hold the kid until they did something. I mean, just awful stuff. And we have recognized that the field has recognized that now and has moved forward. I think it's absolutely perfectly fine to hold two things in mind at the same time. One, children are absolutely beautiful however they come into the world. They are born just who they need to be. Also, some kids need support so they can express who they are. And that's where early intervention really comes in, is that this child is beautiful how they are. We don't need to change them, but we can also, through early intervention, give them tools to make sure those options are wide open, that parental responsibility that we have to give them as many options so they can choose what they want to be, who they want to be as they get older.
That is such a really gorgeous note to end it on because I can say the reason I'm so attached to early intervention is it's really nice. Your child is an adult for many more years than they're actually a child. So the work you do early, I can tell you, pays off in spades. Now, look, I just want to say before we wrap up is that a recording of this links for people who couldn't attend today, who registered, a recording of this will be emailed to you in the coming days when we can get it together to add captions and do all that special stuff. I really want to thank our supporters at Leap In. It's very kind and very generous of them to support this webinar series. So we're really grateful for them. You can Google Leap In easily. For more information like this, please come to autismawareness.com.au. All of the information on our website is evidence-based information because I have people like Andrew making sure we're only sharing really good stuff. And more importantly, it's free. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well because you will see more videos like this, and this webinar and future webinars will all appear on that YouTube channel, and it's all free. That's the whole point of what we're trying to do, is get as much good quality content. Andrew Whitehouse, you have cemented your position as one of my favorite experts in the autism field.
What a joy.
Yeah, I know, it's just what you were hanging out for. But I seriously, you're the world's busiest man. So getting an hour of your time today is really important. And I know I can speak for the other parents who are on this call to say thank you for taking the time to give us a little bit of your brain. And we look forward to having you on another episode. And thank you
It's
everyone so
been
much
an
for
absolute
joining
joy.
us.
Thank you.